But hey, like I said, we got one more interview. Recurring guest here, Michael Katz, wrapping up Ole Miss spring football down there in Oxford. Let's kick it over to Michael Katz of the DJ Journal. Hey, we're pleased to be once again joined by my man Michael Katz. Gotta give him a follow at Michael L. Katz on the Twitter machine. And he covers the Ole Miss Rebels for the Mississippi Daily Journal. Michael, thank you so much for joining me once again.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's draft day. This is like my favorite, other than probably like bowl. I would say bowl week, but it's like bowl month. Other than that, this is like my favorite event of the year. I will watch every single pick because one, I'm a degenerate, but two, man, it's just so much fun to see, guys that you've covered and following kind of, get their dreams realized.
Yeah, no doubt. And so we are recording this right before the draft. This is going to hit go live on Friday, so the first round will be done. So we don't know if Matt Corral will be drafted in the first round as we're recording this, but hopefully he is. And let me pitch it to you this way, Michael, because I know you covered Matt, you've written about him many times. Why will Matt Corral be a solid quarterback in the NFL?
I think he is really good for what the NFL is sort of trending toward right now. And I think if this had been, 10, 15 years ago, I think his size would scare people off. But the fact that we've seen guys like Russell Wilson and I know Baker Mayfield, people have a lot of thoughts on him, but he was the first pick, and Drew Brees had a really successful career at generously probably around 6 foot. But I just think with sort of the run pass options and the emphasis on quarterbacks who kind of do, the NFL is kind of trending toward like what the college schemes are doing now in terms of what they're running offensively. And I think Matt is just a really good match for that sort of offense. And I think a lot of teams are running that sort of scheme, the RPOs and quick throws and taking advantage of his athleticism. I know that, he can get himself in a little bit of trouble by, maybe lowering his shoulder one too many times. And, it's one of those things where you're not going to really take that out of him because that's just kind of who he is. But I think he's got a big arm, and that's not going to be a problem. He's a smart kid. He's got the athleticism. I know there's some hesitation just in terms of, how that offense translates, but I think that the offense is a lot closer to what the NFL is running than it would have been like 10 years ago when there was like the quote unquote pro style offense. I don't really know if there is like a pro style offense anymore. I think there's just all these spread elements, and I think Matt does that really well. He's a gamer. He's a leader. I know teammates and coaches love him. I know there's no such thing as a surefire bet, and who knows how it's going to end up, and who he ends up with is obviously going to make a difference. But I think he's got all the skills, and I think he's got the intangibles that are going to give him a chance to be a good one.
And there's several other prospects from Ole Miss that are going to be drafted here, either in the first round or the rounds to come. And, there's guys like Sam Williams, who's just been dominant. I think Jerrion Ely, who's, maybe a little inconsistent, but he just screams a guy that could really break out in the NFL. If you had to pick one more Rebel that you think, not necessarily he may be the second guy drafted from the team, but the guy that you think may have the brightest future in the NFL, who would that be?
I would probably say, and this is kind of cheating because I don't think this is going to catch anybody by surprise, but Sam Williams I think has a chance to be a really, really good player. And obviously he really broke out this year with, becoming an All-American and all SEC and all that stuff. Blew up the combine like I was told he would. He ran like a 4.46 or whatever it was at 260 pounds, which is just absolutely ridiculous. So I think he's going to be a guy, like if you are looking for a pass rusher, a big, strong guy who can contribute early, I think he's going to be able to get on the field and do that. The other one, and this is kind of one that like some people have forgotten about, is Ben Brown, the guard who missed a lot of this year with injury. I've kind of seen him in like the 4th, 5th, 6th, that third day range. But, I think people really like kind of his versatility, but two, his makeup. By all accounts, he's just a really good kid and was really kind of the leader of that offensive line until he got injured. And so I think those two are probably, the surest bets to get drafted for sure. But I think they're guys who are going to stick around. Jerry Ely and Snoop Connor, I think those are wild cards because, the NFL is just I hate to use like the term devalue the running back, but you don't see running backs go super high anymore. And just with his production, Jerrion probably wasn't going to be a second day pick. I think he's a guy who can go in the third round. I think his athleticism and versatility is going to do him favors just in terms of being able to contribute as a receiver and on special teams. He's a guy that I think if is in the right place could definitely make a difference too.
So switching gears to the current team, of course, the big storyline coming out of the spring, Jackson Dart versus Luke Altmyer, and this quarterback competition is likely go deep into the training camp. Where do things stand right now with the starting quarterback competition there in Oxford?
Well, I don't think people were particularly thrilled with the spring game because Jackson, I believe, went like 11 out of 30, I think it was, which, that's not a completion percentage that's going to make a lot of fans really happy about bringing him in. But he played a lot better in the second half. Luke was just really solid throughout the spring game. But, I don't put a ton of stock in spring games just because, I think we've seen at every school, you can have a guy run for 120 yards in the spring game and then no one ever hears from him in the regular season. And I think, just because someone plays a certain way in the spring doesn't necessarily mean it's going to translate to, what we see in August and September. So, from what we've been told, both guys had their ups and their downs. Kind of the book on both is that Luke Altmyer is probably the more consistent guy and maybe doesn't take as many chances down the field, but isn't going to make the big mistake. That's kind of what we kind of figured was going to be the case, and especially since he's been on campus longer than Jackson. Jackson's only been there for a couple months. I would expect him to know the playbook a little bit better. And Dart is, he's a guy who really wants to take that huge dagger shot down the field, and sometimes it's going to come back and bite him. And in the spring game, he made a couple throws where you were like, that wasn't there. He's got to be maybe a little bit less reckless, but the skill set's there, and sometimes he will make a throw that really makes you say, wow. So, I don't know. I think it's going to be something that isn't decided, officially until, sometime probably right before the first game. I think there's a lot of factors. But, I think it should be fun to monitor, but, it's hard to not imagine, when you bring in a guy like Jackson Dart, not seeing him eventually being the guy. I don't think you brought him in to be a bench warmer. But at the same time, I think Luke's going to get every opportunity. So it's going to be interesting. And I think whoever ends up winning the job is going to have an offense that is going to fit, what each guy does well.
Now, you say don't put too much stock in the spring game. That's a smart thing to say, but I need something to overreact to here from what we saw over the weekend. And I'm going all in on this tight end, Michael Trigg. I continue to hear great things. I'm basically convinced he's going to be a breakout star in the SEC. Tell me whether I'm right or wrong there.
I think you're absolutely right. He's a freak. I remember the first time we went out to the practice field, and we had heard he was a really big guy, and we looked out there and we were like, oh, this guy's quite literally built different. He's bigger, stronger, faster than everyone out there. He just, as I don't remember who said it, but it was when you have a kid who's older than everybody else playing against little kids, it looks like that. And he was dominant in the spring game. He obviously has a connection with Jackson Dart from their time at SC. He was productive at SC until he got hurt, partway through the year. I think that if we kind of look historically at what Lane Kiffin's offenses have been in the past 5-6 years, wherever he's been, the tight end has played a really big part. O.J. Howard, Harrison Bryant, Kenny Yeboah a couple years ago. Last year it wasn't really as much of a factor, I think mainly because, maybe they didn't have a guy quite of the same caliber as those guys. But if you look at just in terms of an explosive guy, I think Michael Trigg has a chance to be a superstar for sure.
Then moving on from Trigg, let's not put him in the equation. Who do you think is Ole Miss leading receiver next season?
Ooh, that's a good one. I am going to say Jordan Watkins, the Louisville transfer. I know that probably the popular guess would be Jonathan Mingo, and it could very well be Jonathan Mingo. He's the veteran. He's the guy with the most experience, but he has had some inconsistency in his career. And we didn't see much of him this spring, but Watkins is the Louisville transfer. He did a lot of really nice things for Louisville last year. When we talked to Lane Kiffin about him, he said he was kind of surprised his numbers weren't better, just kind of based on what he can do. And just in the time that we were able to see, practices, it looked like both quarterbacks are really comfortable with him as kind of that safety blanket. And I think he's a guy who's going to get a lot of targets. I don't know if he's going to be the super dynamic guy. We haven't really seen enough of him, but I think he's a guy who whoever the quarterback is going to be really comfortable with. So I think Watkins is a guy to really keep an eye on.
Now, everyone's psyched up for Zach Evans, former 5-star. He did well at TCU. He looks like he may be slotted in right away as a starter for Ole Miss. But that guy that really caught my eye, particularly in the spring game, I didn't know anything about him. Ucele's Bentley. I mean, he looks like he's tailor-made to play for Lane Kiffin and can do so many things on the field. So, of those two players, who do you think has more yards from scrimmage next season for Ole Miss?
Yeah, I mean, I think Evans is going to kind of be, I don't know if workhorse is the right term, but I think he's going to be the guy who probably gets the most carries just because he's kind of more of your downhill, runner who you could probably give the ball to 25 times if you needed to. He's a stud. There's a reason he was as highly sought after as he was, not only coming out of high school, but coming out of the portal. But man, Bentley just adds an element of kind of like what Jerry Neely could do in terms of being a slasher and a guy who can get in the open field and just kind of disappear down the sideline. And you kind of add in his pass catching ability. I think those two are going to be a really, it's hard to say that like when you lost, 2,000 whatever yards of rushing between Ely and Snoop Connor and Henry Parrish, who transferred to Miami, that, they're not going to lose anything in the running back room. But when you see Evans and Bentley and how they sort of complement each other, I think it's got a chance to be really exciting.
Now, the defense, I think a lot of people just assume they're going to take a step back because they lost DJ Durkin. But you got to look at it, man. They added Jared Ivey, J.J. Pegues, Kerry Coleman, Troy Brown, Asheem Young. I mean, what are the chances Ole Miss defense, which – they had a hell of a turnaround last year. What are the chances they may even be better this year?
Yeah, it's I don't know if like there's going to be like that All-American kind of guy like Sam was, but I think, and this is one of the things that Lane has kind of talked about this spring, especially like on the front, the defensive front. This is the deepest they've been, and they've just added a lot of bodies. So, if a guy needs a breather, there's not a huge gap between talent and skill level. And Yad Ivey, Pegues, Cedric Johnson, had 6.5 sacks or whatever it was last year. They have some, and Tavius Robinson's a guy who's been there a while and can do some things. They've got a lot of talent on that front. That's, I think, one of their strengths. I think the defensive backs are a strength too because they return a ton of guys. And like you said, they brought in Asheem from Iowa State, who's he's been a playmaker in his Cyclones career. I think he's going to step in and do some nice things right away. The only question really is sort of that linebacker spot because they lost pretty much every meaningful linebacker they had last year with Chance Campbell and Mark Robinson and Lakia Henry. But like you said, they added in Troy Brown and Kari Coleman from TCU. And, I think those guys have a chance to step in and do some really good things. We just haven't really seen it. We didn't really see a ton of them because, there were a lot of injuries this spring. And so it kind of made the evaluation a little tough, but if you look at the talent, I mean, Troy Brown was a 3-time, all MAC guy. And I know the MAC's different than the SEC, but it's pretty clear the guy can play. And, Coleman did some really nice things at TCU. So, I think this has a chance. I don't know, like I said, if you're going to get that sort of, first team All-American or second team All-American candidate, and maybe you do, who knows. But I think like depth-wise and just in terms of the number of guys that they have, I think this is probably as deep as this team has been, particularly defensively.
Yeah, and Ole Miss has never won 10 games in the regular season until they did it last season. Now I'm sitting here looking at the schedule, Michael. I mean, the toughest non-conference game, it might be at Georgia Tech, either that or Tulsa at home. So, you got to feel great about Ole Miss going undefeated in the non-conference. The SEC schedule, they get Kentucky at home. That's the first league game. At Vanderbilt's the second. Auburn at home. I mean, is it crazy to think that Ole Miss could win back-to-back 10-win regular seasons, provided that they hit on a quarterback here?
Yeah, I mean, the way the schedule lines up, there's no reason they shouldn't be, like 6-1 or something like that. I mean, this should be a team that's flirting with the top 10, in partway through October. Now, the end of the schedule does get a little, dangerous with, LSU at LSU, at A&M, against Alabama, at Arkansas, Mississippi State. I mean, those are, those on paper look like really, really tough games just because, those teams were really good last year, and they are with, Alabama's Alabama. That's never going to be an easy one. But, I think with how strong they can start, I don't know if this is going to be like a 2-loss team or anything like that. But I think that like there's a chance that this is like, and I think a 9-win team is very possible out of this because I think they can win some of those late games. And I think if this team went like 9-3, that would be a top 10, 15 team with just how loaded that schedule is toward the end. And I think they'd be pretty happy with that. I think 10 might be, a 10-win regular season would be tough just because, at LSU is going to be hard just because it always is. At A&M, there's always a lot around them. At Arkansas, with how resurgent that program's been, I think it might be tough to win, all of those games and versus Alabama, of course. But I think there's a really good chance this is like a 9-3-ish team, and maybe if things break right, a 10-2 team. But I think this is what Ole Miss did last season was pretty special, and just again, it's crazy that they've never had a 10-win regular season ever, even with Eli and Archie and all of these really good players they've had. This is a first, and so to expect that, I don't know, but I know the schedule lines up pretty well early, and I think that's going to give them a chance to probably get around that 9-win range. And I think if that was the case, they'd have to feel pretty good about that.
All right, last thing for you, Michael. Really appreciate all your time. So much Southern Cal, USC connections to Oxford. Lane Kiffin, Matt Corral, Jackson Dart, Michael Trigg, the Wyoming Sports Writer of the Year, Michael Katz. I mean, are we destined to have Ole Miss play the University of Southern Cal in the Las Vegas Bowl? I mean, that's got to happen this year, don't you think?
I mean, if anything is like lining up to go that way, that would be absolutely amazing. Just because, like, I had a moment the other day during the spring game where Jackson Dart was throwing passes to Michael Trigg, and like I thought to myself, like, there's a multiverse where like this is happening at USC still. Like it really made me think about like the infinite universe like idea, because like it's just so crazy that like this is all like come together. I mean, the funniest possible thing would be Matt Corral getting drafted by the Seahawks because of Pete Carroll. I mean, that would just be the icing on the cake in terms of my mind just being absolutely blown. No, I mean, it's funny though. Ole Miss and at USC do play in a couple years, so that that'll be fun. But man, I can think of a lot of worse places to be than Las Vegas for a bowl game.
Yeah, I may have made that up, but I swear at one point, SEC, Pac-12. I think they're playing in Las Vegas for the Las Vegas Bowl, unless I could be totally wrong about that. But hey, I've taken up enough of your time. I really appreciate you. Michael Katz, give him a follow at Michael L. Katz. He covers Ole Miss for the Mississippi Daily Journal. Thank you so much, my friend, for joining me once again. I really appreciate our chats.
Of course, man. Appreciate you, buddy.
All right, so just want to say thanks again, Michael, for joining the line. Terrific stuff as always. I hope you guys really appreciated that. Ole Miss, one of the biggest wild cards in the SEC. I have, as you could tell from that interview there, I mean, hell, Ole Miss, I think I got them 8, 9 in my power rankings right now. I think number 8, but hell, I'm talking myself into another 10-win Ole Miss season. I mean, that's just how much talent they got down there to work with. Lane Kiffin and company cannot be discounted at this point in time, so cannot wait to see what the Rebels have for us on the field this fall. Should be one hell of a season once again there in Oxford. But hey, it's a late one. I'm going to cut it off here. Hopefully we're going to have some weekend coverage. We might do a wrap-up of rounds 2 and 3 on Saturday, and then Monday maybe a complete picture of what happened in the NFL draft. So stay tuned. We didn't get you a pod on Thursday. We may be getting you an extra bonus one on Saturday. We'll have to see what happens there in the NFL draft. But that's going to do it for this episode of the show. I appreciate each and every one of you for tuning in. As always, we'll catch you on the next one.